Welcome to the National Training Centre in Combat Mission Cold War. We're swapping the Fulda Gap for the Mojave Desert here to get ourselves a good kicking from the US Army's opposing force. The enemy is advancing and his forward security element, usually of reinforced motor rifle company strength, is hurtling towards Brown Pass. Our job is to inflict as much damage on the enemy as possible without taking too many casualties, and one of the really interesting components of the NTC campaign is that we get to choose how we do that. The very first mission is a decision point where we've got a small scale strategic map with two options marked on it. We can go forward and conduct a hasty attack on the enemy while he's still out in the open, or we can hold back and conduct a spoiling attack as he enters the pass itself. There are no wrong answers here, but I've decided for this playthrough at least to be as aggressive as possible. I don't want to let him come to me. I want to go in and disrupt his advance, break up his drills, and generally get in his face. This may go completely wrong, but that's the point of the NTC. It's a training environment where troops can afford to fail and then learn from those failures, unlike actual combat where you don't get second chances. Our chunk of the NTC we're going to be fighting our hasty attack over is 2 kilometers across and 4 kilometers deep. The terrain itself is desert, but there are plenty of elevation changes. Broadly speaking, the ground slopes away from east to west, with several downward steps breaking up the continuous elevation change that creates some significant areas of dead ground. Then there are the two hills adjacent to the US setup zone, Hill 201.1 and Hill 165.5. These are surrounded by cliffs and rocky skirts that greatly restrict vehicle access, though there may be a few paths up here and there. These two hills offer excellent observation over most of the map. They're going to be really important for both sides. For this mission, I've got most of B Company Team, which is the core force. Starting on map, I have an infantry platoon in M113s, including one squad with a Dragon ATGM and a forward observer team. 2 M150 tank hunters with tows from the weapons platoon, plus the weapons platoon HQ in an M151A2, and the company FO team in another M113. That's not a very big force for a map this size. The critical element to begin with is undoubtedly going to be the M150s, which have the range to reach out to pretty much anywhere on the map they can see. More elements from the company group are only 5 minutes behind. Another infantry platoon, this one with 2 Dragon ATGMs, 3 M106 mortar carriers with 81mm mortars, and a tank platoon of M60A1s. Like the M150s, the tanks are going to be the major players here, especially against a mechanized opponent. Potentially extremely useful is the off-map support available. 2 AH-1F Cobra attack helicopters with 4 tow missiles, 19 unguided FFR rockets, and a 20mm cannon with armor-piercing incendiary rounds each, plus a pair of F-16s, each of which is bringing 2 500-pound cluster bombs and more 20mm API to the party. How effective these are going to be is going to depend massively on whether I can get them to attack in the right area. All 4 aerial assets have call-in times of 12 to 13 minutes, and the maximum size of their area missions does not feel very big on a map this size, especially where the terrain is basically offering no obstacle to enemy movement. Trying to predict where the enemy is going to be 12 minutes into the future could be very tough. As for the enemy, a forward security element usually consists of a reinforced motor rifle company, 3 platoons of infantry, an air defense section with handheld SAMs, and a machine gun platoon, all mounted in either BTRs or BMPs. And because this is the NTC, I'm going to assume I'm up against the much more worrying BMPs. These are armed with a 73mm gun, which can and will destroy even my M60s from the front, plus they carry their own 85 ATGMs for longer range anti-tank work, and to cap it all, they're proof against the 50 caliber machine guns from my M113s from the front, and even from the sides except at point blank range. As if that wasn't bad enough, the forward security element is backed up by a tank platoon, and all of the Soviet tanks, even the oldest T-55s in the game, can punch holes in M60s all day long, never mind the M113. M113s. The FSC is also likely to be supported by artillery and attack helicopters and does not rush blindly into battle. It will be preceded by regimental reconnaissance elements, potentially either in BRDM scout cars or more BMPs or BTRs. These are probably still mobile given the pace of operations, but it's not impossible that some OPFOR recce troops are already on map in hastily established observation posts. In other words, this is going to be tough, but of course that's the point. How am I going to tackle this then? The mission is to advance to contact via the noted phase lines, Toto, Journey and Yazoo, engage and destroy the enemy FSE before it can enter Brown Pass. And supporting that we have the commander's intent, which is to ensure that the enemy force is disrupted and its combat power degraded to prevent them from conducting further offensive actions. The commander's intent is really important. It's an acknowledgement that everything is going to collapse into chaos at some point, potentially rendering more specific objectives irrelevant, and provides guidance that should stay relevant even if the specifics change. So, although we are conducting a hasty attack, and we have these phase lines down the map from our deployment zone, the overall intention is to give the enemy a good kicking and throw him off balance. This is going to require two elements. First, I need to get as much information about the enemy as possible. Where he is, where he's going, how fast he's going, and exactly what vehicles and capabilities he's brought along. At the same time, I need to stop the enemy from getting all that information about me. Then, using the information, I need to find a way to engage the enemy on my terms. I need to create an engagement or a series of engagements where I can maximize my advantages and minimize his advantages to destroy him without suffering too many losses. Simple, right? The time limit is only 40 minutes, so I'm expecting the pressure to start immediately and just ramp right up until the end. In practical terms, I think the hills are going to be critical. They're the obvious place for both me and the enemy to set up OPs. If I can get set up there, I'll be able to see the FSE coming. If the enemy can stop me getting up there, then he'll go a long way to blinding me. So my starting infantry platoon is going to take and hold Hill 201.1. It looks like they can just about get up to the top in their M113s through some gaps in the rocky ground, and as an added bonus, the path seems to be all on my side of the hill, so they should be pretty safe. Hopefully they'll be able to deal with any enemy recce troops on the summit, but in case there are more of them around Hill 165.5, I'm going to kick proceedings off by sending the two Cobras in. They might not spot anything, they might be engaged by enemy handheld SAMs, but if they find some enemy OPs or vehicles, they should hopefully shoot them up. With the hills secure, or relatively secure, I should be able to get that information coming in and start making decisions about how I want to engage the FSE. In particular, whether I want to try and fight from the lee of Hill 201, essentially using it as a giant corner to hide behind, or if I'm going to need to spread out more and try and get into hull-down positions further into the open. This may seem like a kind of somewhat defensive mindset. It's not impossible that the best option might be to get further down the map, but those phase lines seem a long way away out in the open, and letting the enemy come to me instead of going to him seems like it's going to work best. Heading up Hill 201.1 pays off right away. The climbing M113 spots a trio of BMPs in the distance. This looks like two BMP 1Ps and a BMP 1PK, the command variant, which would add up to a reconnaissance platoon. They're already crossing phase line Toto, about 1500 meters away from my forces at the base of Hill 201. They've got clear line of sight to my two M113s crawling up the totally exposed slope, so I scramble to bring the only asset to bear that I can, one of the M150s. This gets a missile off from an awkward position on the slope and manages to nail the furthest BMP, only just after it's fired off an AT-5 towards the hill. Without the operator though, the Soviet missile loses control and crashes into the desert. First blood to me then, but a very close run thing. The M113s crash to a halt and start kicking their dismounts out, but I've stopped them a little early. When I set the orders, I was more bothered about the possibility of lurking Soviet recce teams with RPGs on top of the hill and wanted to get the infantry out before getting too close. Although I'd seen the BMPs on turn 1, they weren't actually moving, so I never adjusted the orders, and Now that that reconnaissance platoon has moved up, they're exposed as another BMP launches a missile. Luckily, the OPFOR gunner misses high and wide, and the M113s edge around the side of the summit to safety. Meanwhile, the M150 has spotted the offending BMP, and after what feels like an atrociously long reload, takes it out with a tow. That's the initial crisis dealt with, 2/3 of a Soviet recon platoon taken out for no losses, but they're not the only OPFOR out there. Although I'd called the Cobras in on Hill 165, one of them spotted something just on the outside edge of their engagement area and smacked it with a tow. Whatever it was burns, and my forces on Hill 201 spot a third BMP-1P nearby, so there's probably another recon platoon close in a depression under Hill 165, which is just awesome. The only weapons I have that can reliably take out the BMPs at range are the tows on the 150s and the single Dragon shoulder-launched ATGM in one of the infantry squads, which I'm quickly sending up into the skirts of Hill 201, where they can hopefully get a better field of fire. I'm also a bit worried about my M150 under the hill. They might have just managed to bag 2 BMPs, but it's disturbingly exposed where it is. Bringing it down slope a little and getting a small nearby mound between it and the enemy might put it into a much more preferable partial or even full hull down position with just the launcher exposed. But I hadn't counted on it being so close to a patch of impassable heavy rocks. The M150's TAC AI has a bit of a freak out trying to pathfind its way around, and the surviving BMP-1PK out on the horizon flies an 85 right into its side. The impact wipes out the crew and destroys the vehicle, which is just fantastic. To make matters worse, as well as losing 1/3 of my current meaningful anti-tank capability, my infantry up on Hill 201 have spotted not just the 2 BMPs left on the Hill 165 spurring forwards, but something far more ominous off in the distance. Just crossing phase line journey is a T-72, and where there's one, there's probably more. The silver lining is that I've seen them coming. That doesn't quite balance out the bad news is that they are far, far closer than I would like, and closing the distance fast. That's a big problem, especially because the tanks are probably accompanied by the rest of the FSE, and even if the enemy were so obliging as to not shoot back, my current force simply doesn't have the ammunition to deal with the whole forward security element. Luckily, we're 4 minutes in, so just one more turn before my reinforcements are due to arrive. They're not here yet though, and with the surviving BMPs of the close-in recon platoon getting distressingly close, I need to put up a backstop. This is difficult because I've split my infantry platoon. Half of it is up on top of Hill 201, leaving only 2 squads and the platoon HQ at the bottom, and one of those squads is already in position with the Dragon. The other squad rushes forward in its M113, grabs all the M72 Laws it can carry, and piles out on the edge of my deployment zone's reverse slope, directly in the path of OPFOR. It's basically a point-blank reverse slope AT ambush running on desperation and hope, but it adds another layer to my position. The Dragon team spots the BMPs coming in from their perch as they round the corner and fires a missile, which actually connects. The Dragon does not have a good reputation, but it'll punch through the armour on a BMP with no problem whatsoever. The Soviets have stopped in what is dead ground to my deployment zone, but the Dragon team is high enough to see over the crest line. They reload and put a second missile into the last BMP, knocking that one out as well before they get spotted. That's given me a bit of breathing space and finished off the immediate threat, but now the Dragon team only has 1 missile left. 5 minutes, and the reinforcements don't arrive. There are now 2 T-72s in the distance, following up the far recon platoon. 6 minutes, and my troops on the hill spot a third T-72 almost underneath them, close in. This is bad. 7 minutes, a T-72 rounds the corner and the Dragon team fires its last missile. The gunner immediately loses control and it drops harmlessly to the desert floor. Worse, one of the distant T-72s has spotted the dust thrown up by the missile launch and throws a 125mm HE shell their way. The round is short, but throws enough shrapnel up into the faces of the team to kill 2 of them, as well as a member of the newly law-laden Company FO team scrambling to grab some cover down below. This is very bad. 8 minutes, still no reinforcements. My scouts on Hill 201 can now see 2 T-72s close in below them, only a few hundred meters away from my deployment zone. The nearest stops to wait for its partner to catch up, but despite being half hidden behind some ground, is spotted by my surviving M150. I've had this stashed out on the map edge to try and get some flanking angles across the front of my deployment zone, and this pays off as it flies a TOW into the side of the T-72 and destroys it. There's no time to celebrate though. The other tank plows straight on towards the AT ambush squad who ready their M72s. Meanwhile, the distant T-72 pair hooks in from their flank. Rushing up that side of the map has gotten them up onto higher ground, and they're able to spot and engage the frantically reversing M113 of the AT ambush squad, taking it out with ease and then adding the platoon HQ APC to their tally as well. 9 minutes. The AT ambush is sprung, and 2 M72s somehow connect with the advancing OPFOR tank at 80 meters, scoring penetrations on the upper hull and turret roof that set off the tank's ammunition, destroying it completely. Then a 105mm Sabo round flies in from behind the AT ambush and adds a third penetration. My reinforcements have finally arrived. This might give me more anti-tank firepower. Along with the 5 M60A1s, this infantry platoon has 2 Dragons, but I'm still in the same tactical hull here. It might be a more comfortable tactical hull than it was. Spreading out on the reverse slope here, I can hopefully put a layered defence between infantry with M72 Laws, the Dragons and the M60s while I wait for my air support to come in. I made the call the instant I saw T-72s moving up in the distance and threw down a mix of missions out in front of my force, but with the long call-in times, judging the correct lead is difficult. At the rate they're going, OPFOR might be past the target zones and overrunning me before the Cobras and the F-16s actually come in. Still, grabbing Hill 201 continues to give me a huge advantage. I'm not blind down on my reverse slope, I can see what's coming. The enemy has a lot of firepower. A mix of high explosive shells and machine gun fire cause infantry casualties here and there, but as OPFOR vehicles cross the crest and enter the kill zone, they get chewed up. The lead platoon of BMPs are taken out one by one between the M60s, the M150 and one of the Dragon teams, but my main concern are the 2 remaining T-72s. These come roaring over the crest, but find themselves face to face with superior firepower at close range. The first is destroyed by a single hit from a hull-down M60, the second takes a hit to the front slope that kills the driver and destroys the engine before being taken out by a Dragon. That's the immediate crisis dealt with. Now it's on to the next problem. There looks to be still 2 platoons of BMPs on their way in, plus a few other minor elements, and while I'm confident that my defence can handle them, I have 2 issues. First, the BMPs are a real threat. The heat warhead from that 73mm gun will absolutely penetrate the frontal armour of my M60s, and I really want to keep them alive. Even if I come out on top, there's some significant risk in getting into a firefight. The upside is that the BMPs are rolling forward in a way that's going to expose them to my air support, which is coming in soon. The downside is problem number 2. My force is really cramped up and concentrated on my little reverse slope. Having a lot of units in a small space is making me nervous because like this they're an excellent target for enemy artillery or attack helicopters. I want to spread them out as much as I can, which means leaving the safety of my current position and not only potentially exposing myself to the BMPs, but getting close to the engagement areas of my own close air support. Air assets in combat mission do make mistakes, and the last thing I want is for my tanks to get a tow upside them, so I've kind of hemmed myself into a corner. If I didn't have control of Hill 201, and there were enemy observers up there capable of directing artillery onto me, then I would be in a really bad place, but I do control the hill, so I can afford to wait a little for my support to come in before I push out. One of the BMPs strays a little close and exposes itself to a Dragon team. I've moved up onto the skirts of the hill, which uses its last missile to take it out. Another is flank onto the M113s up near the summit, and I get one to engage, but the range is a bit too far for the 50 caliber M2, and although rounds consistently hit the thinner armour on the sides and turret top, they fail to penetrate. Then the Cobras and the F-16s come in and ruin OPFOR's day. Despite a couple of missiles streaking up from Soviet handheld SAMs at the far end of the map, the BMPs are chewed up by tow missiles from the attack helicopters and cluster bombs from the fast movers. It's interesting to note that the tows are more effective by far. As a guided weapon, they tend to hit whatever they're aimed at, while the cluster bombs are much more impressive. The combination of spacings between the OPFOR vehicles and the bomblet dispersal patterns mean they only actually manage a couple of hits. Once the tows have all been expended and the F-16s have flown off, I can start to move my M60s forward to mop up the survivors. Two on the right have already been edging up by exploiting smoke popped by the late T-72s, and now in conjunction with another two on the left under Hill 201 and the platoon HQ, they begin picking off individual BMPs. It's not all going my way though. What look like enemy heavy mortars or artillery start hammering my observers up on the summit. I've left them in place for too long and paid the price. The infantry platoon forward observer up there probably had to stay where it was because it was coordinating the F-16s, but the other elements could, and should, have moved off to other areas of the hill and spread out a lot more. To compound that mistake, I get greedy with the M60s and overextend. Moving to clear up OPFOR survivors and maybe pass a few phase lines means cresting the steps in the terrain as it slopes downwards, and the first of these is hiding some kind of Soviet team that instantly takes out an M60 with a flanking shot. The silver lining is that the crewmen bail out, but it feels like it's time for a ceasefire. There are enough burning OPFOR tanks and BMPs on the field to tell me I've destroyed the incoming FSE, which should disrupt the enemy advance significantly. The phase lines are just lines on the map, icing on the cake if I can touch them, but the real mission is oriented on the enemy. The AI automatically accepts the ceasefire, and the result is a major victory for the US, with 2,947 points compared to OPFOR's 757. I've lost 17 men dead and 8 wounded, plus an M60, an M150, 2 M113s, and an M152 Mule. Not fantastic, and a lot of those were the results of mistakes in positioning, hanging around too long or getting greedy, but B Company team is still in the fight and ready to go. The same can't be said of OPFOR's forward security element. They've lost 64 men killed and 10 wounded, and they're down 4 T-72s and 17 BMPs of various types. While their infantry is intact, mostly because it dismounted way away from the action instead of staying on board the BMPs, it's out in the desert on its own and unsupported. I'm not really sure what it's doing out there. So, that's the first mission in the Hasty attack branch complete. Broadly speaking, this went mostly along the lines I was expecting. I went into this battle expecting immediate pressure and expecting that I would have to fight defensively. I might not have been expecting quite so much immediate pressure, or that I would be fighting a defensive battle from inside my deployment zone, but the general two-part plan worked extremely well. Getting eyes up on Hill 201.1 to get that flow of spotting information coming in was critical, even if I could have handled the forces up there a bit better and avoided getting smacked by artillery. Equally, deciding to exploit the lower slopes of the hill and a reverse slope inside my setup zone to keep my forces out of sight and force short-range engagements worked really well, but I might need to consider what I do with my infantry vehicles. The 2 M113s I lost were lost basically because I kept them near their infantry when it might have been smarter to keep some ground between them and OPFOR. Finally, the last part of the battle where I attempted to follow up with my tanks went well to a point, but as soon as I got into range of concealed enemy infantry, I lost an M60 to handheld AT. That was pretty unnecessary, especially seeing as though it was clear that the FSC had lost all its vehicles at that point, and I could probably have spotted the enemy team if I'd moved up and gotten eyes on Hill 165. But that's what the NTC is for. It's about making mistakes. We'll see what mistakes I make in the next mission, where we're going to be pursuing what's left of the enemy. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.